Welcome to the Even Better podcast, where your host, Sinikka Waugh of Your Clear Next Step, brings you exciting content about making communities better by helping people get even better at work.
Well, hello, friends, and thank you so much for joining us on today's episode of the Even Better podcast. This is Sinikka Waugh, and I am so delighted that you joined us today. This is part of our ongoing mission here at Your Clear Next Step to help us all have even better workdays. And, today's topic it might be one of those topics that you think to yourself, wow, that's a tough topic to pick up today, but it's top of mind for me. And so this is where we're going to go. And the topic today is 4 things I've learned about dealing with crisis. And as I record this in February of 2024, those who've been close to me and to my family are aware of some of the things that have been going on in our lives that might have caused this to be a top of mind topic. And even through crisis, I can tell you that there is plenty of joy and there is absolute evidence of the hand of God in our lives. And I can say this with a smile today because I know that, as my friend Nancy would remind us, it all comes out okay in the end. And if it's not okay, it's not the end. But as we're continuing this journey, there have been some really important things that I've learned about crisis. And I think this is powerful for us as we work through our work days, because sometimes we encounter people who are going through crisis in their own right and in their own moment. And we've long talked about the truth that workplace feelings are not only impacted by things that are happening at work, they're impacted by things that are happening at home. And that things that might be considered workplace impacts are not known to all of us, right? As you're looking around at who knows what and who's aware of the things that are going on behind the scenes, there are levels of leadership that have the burden on their shoulders of protecting others from things that they know that others don't know yet. And so sometimes we're dealing with crisis that others simply don't know. We know, and it's internal to us, and we're dealing with it because maybe it's happening at home or outside of home or in our community or with our friends or with our families, or maybe it's happening in our work. And maybe it's a crisis that we're sharing. And maybe it's a crisis that if you and I are in a conversation together, you and I both know the same crisis. Maybe we have the same perspective on this crisis, but maybe we don't. And maybe we don't even know the crisis that one another is sharing. So I invite us to stop and just pause for a second and acknowledge that crisis is one of those things that we could learn a thing or two from. We could stand to have better work days if we stopped and thought about it a little bit differently. So these are 4 things I've learned about dealing with crisis. And before we get too far into it, I want to just pause with some definitions because I did take a minute and look up what is crisis and how am I using that word, and let's define terms. And if my sister is listening to this, she's going to chuckle because she and I have had just all sorts of fun conversations lately on how we define words and how we define terms, because if we're using words differently, we're going to fail to communicate effectively. So let's look at what crisis is. And as I looked up definitions, it's a time of intense difficulty or trouble or danger, or a time when a difficult or important decision has to be made. In medical terms, it's the turning point of a disease when an important change takes place, indicating either recovery or death. It's the turning point for better or worse in an acute disease or fever. It's an attack of pain or distress or disordered function. It's an emotionally significant event or a radical change of status in a person's life. In literature, it's the decisive moment in a plot. It's an unstable or crucial time, as in a state of affairs, such as a financial crisis or an energy crisis. It's a situation that's reached a critical phase. So whether we're talking health or finances, whether we're talking individual, personal, or communal, we see these patterns. It's a turning point. It's a moment where something is changing. It's a moment where a decision needs to be made. It's a moment that's critical. It's a moment where emotions are high. It's a moment where the stakes are high, the risks are high. The things that come next are really, really important. And we need to have our wits about us, if you will. But those very things, when the stakes are high, the risks are high, and the things that come next are really, really important, that level of stress, in my experience, that level of distress is often what robs us of our ability to be our usual selves, certainly our best selves. So crisis is this big thing, a big stakes moment where something's going to shift, and it could shift for the worse. So 4 things I've learned about dealing with crisis, especially if you're in it with someone else. Here's the first thing I've learned. Recognizing that you're in crisis is a really helpful first step. Let me pause on that one for a second. Recognizing that you're in crisis is a really helpful first step. Was it G.I. Joe who used to say, knowing is half the battle, right? And now you know, and knowing is half the battle, right? Recognizing it, acknowledging it, owning it, recognizing at this moment that we're in crisis, knowing that this is one of those moments, that you're having a health crisis or a financial crisis or a personal crisis or a communal crisis or an organizational crisis, that this is it. This is one of those high stakes moments. This is one of those, to use the term, life or death moments, loss or win moments. This is it. This is a high stakes moment. And if you can recognize that you're in one of those moments, you can bring to the table the right set of game. I'm not going to make a sports analogy here because that's not me. But if you just think you're playing the regular everyday practice, you might miss out on the really important digging deep that you have to bring in times of crisis. So recognizing this is emotional intelligence at its best. It's self-awareness. It's the awareness of who I am and how I'm showing up. It's also the self-management. It's the getting a grip on what I do and how I usually churn, and maybe not letting myself churn in that moment. It's situational awareness. It's how are other people behaving in this moment? What are the political dynamics around me, the organizational dynamics around me, the other people and what they're doing? And how can I move us forward? It's recognizing that and looking around and going, whoa, these signs are pointing to crisis, and acknowledging that I need to do something to respond. I'm not going to say react, but I need to do something to respond to this crisis. Maybe this is where the freeze or flee or fight or flight response comes in, but I need to at least do something. I need to recognize that this is a time of crisis. And so crisis behaviors, crisis response, emergency responses are situationally appropriate here. The things that we do every day are not the right things. The heightened response systems are the right ones here. In those of us who grew up in the Cold War era and the Cold War movies, DEFCON 5, this is a heightened response moment. This says we are at that moment. So a second thing that I've learned in dealing with crisis, learned through dealing with crisis, is that it's valuable and useful to honor and acknowledge that we all do crisis differently. So can we honor and acknowledge that we all do crisis differently? I do not do crisis like you do crisis. You do not do crisis like she does crisis. She does not do crisis like he does crisis. Now, there are some patterns. There are absolutely some patterns. And we know my dear friend and colleague, Dick Hanish, is going to tell us that some of us go loud and some of us go quiet and some of us check in, and there are patterns, and we can largely group along those patterns. And I'm going to point out some trends that we can see in some examples. There are patterns, and there are trends, and there are examples, and we can largely group people into some buckets. And that's true. But individually and at your core and who you are as a human, your response to crisis is going to be different than the person sitting next to you. And it is unfair and unreasonable to assume that they're going to respond to crisis in exactly the same way that you are. And it is more helpful, instead of saying to someone, you have to respond to crisis exactly the same way I do, and if you don't, you're an idiot. Instead of that, to honor and acknowledge that they're going to do it differently. So let me give you some examples. There are some people who, in times of crisis, their ability to read the room goes up a notch, or 10 or 27. Their ability to look at who is spiraling, who is calm, who is on fire, who is angry, who is urgent, who is in which place in their mental space. There are people who are good at reading the room, and under crisis, they get even better. Some people are given that gift and they get even better under crisis. There are some people who maybe they're not great at reading or detecting, but they have this calming effect. They just calm people down. They have this soothing voice and this calming ability that just puts a blanket on whatever fire was spinning out of control. There are some people who are just naturally funny, and in their moment, in their crisis, they bring comic relief, and they're not being insensitive, they're not being reductive of the moment, being they're not reducing the seriousness of the moment. They're just funny, and their comic relief lets us breathe when the rest of us are holding our breath and forgetting to breathe. And comic relief is great. There are some of us who under crisis inspire and call to action. There are some people who, when you put them in crisis, they will immediately see what is the action that needs to be taken, and let's do it, folks. There are some who under crisis will soak in the data and think through all the options. There are some who will make decisions and be able to splice through that data and make those decisions. There are some who are phenomenal at waiting, and they understand the waiting game, and they can wait until the last responsible moment. There are some who know how to put words to thoughts and fears and concerns. There are some who are really good at whispering words of encouragement or hope. There are some who are the voice of optimism and the voice of joy. All of these, in times of crisis, are good and worthy and important and valuable, and none of them are better or worse than the other. And if I do crisis one way and you do crisis a different way, it doesn't mean that my way is good and your way is bad, or your way is good and my way is bad. And we should not add to the crisis by arguing with each other over who does crisis better. My goodness. And when we come to a time of crisis, if we notice that, oh, that person is so great at calming people down, we shouldn't berate ourselves and say, gosh, I wish I was good at calming people down. I wish I was that good at dealing with data that way. I wish I was that good at thinking through all the options. I'm not that good at that. No, 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 no. That's adding to the crisis. Stop. Stop. Honor and acknowledge that we all do crisis differently. Because this is going to get me to my third point. When you are in crisis, when we are in crisis, leveraging each other's strengths is way more valuable than insisting we all do it one way. Let me say that again. Leveraging each other's strengths is way more valuable than insisting we all do it one way. Imagine, think about that example that I just gave, or that list of examples that I just gave. Imagine if we had a room where everybody was good at calming everyone down. And all we had in time of crisis was a calm room. Well, that's not helpful if what we need to do is evacuate because there's a fire. Imagine if in a particular situation, what we had was everyone good at inspiring and taking action. Well, that's not useful if what we need to do is first figure out, are we responding to a fire or a tornado? Do we need to evacuate or do we need to hunker down and go to the basement? Leveraging each other's strengths is way more valuable than insisting we all do it the same way. Now, this one is particularly poignant for me because one of my strengths, which is no secret, if you've been listening to any of these podcast episodes, I have not made a secret about the fact that I am not a recovery control freak because the word recovering is just really, really, well, I'm not. I haven't recovered yet. I am still a control freak. And if you are a recovering control freak, or if you're a control freak who hasn't figured out how to recover from that yet, and you're in a time of crisis, this is an especially great moment. A time of crisis is an especially great moment to let others do what they do best. Oh man. As a control freak in a time of crisis, what I want to do is control everything and be in mastery or possession of every possible outcome, every possible decision, every possible piece of data, every loose thread, and be in mastery of everything. And that's ridiculous. How is that anything other than ridiculous? So if you're a control freak, then in crisis, what better way than to look around and say, holy smokes, isn't this great? I got a data guy here. Let the data guy be in charge of the data. I got an optimist here. Let the optimist be in charge of hope. I've got a read the room person here. Let the read the room person read the room. My goodness, what a great way under crisis to let everyone do what they do best. Leveraging each other's strengths, so much better than insisting we all do it the same way. If someone else is more emotionally intelligent than you, this is a great moment to listen to their coaching. Don't beat yourself up about it. Just listen. If you are a calming presence, this is a great time to step up and be calming. I think about the cord of many strands, right? A cord of many strands is not easily broken. So let's bind together. Let's work together to get through crisis. When I think about this, there's a passage in, it's also not a secret that I operate from a place of faith, and much of what I find is from the Bible. And First Corinthians 12 talks about the body with many parts, right? First Corinthians 12, which is the precursor to a section that many have read and have heard quoted, which is First Corinthians 13. Go look it up, you'll recognize it right away. But then back up to First Corinthians 12, there's a section about the body has many parts, and the foot can't say, well, I'm just a foot, I'm not an eye, so I'm not useful. Or it can't say, the hand can't say, well, you're not a foot, so what good are you? Right there, these parts of the body, we need all of it. When we think of a team, so let's go to the workplace. Let's take that analogy. We think about the workplace as a team, a workplace team existing as a body, systems thinking here. You have a whole unit, you have a whole team. And in time of crisis, we've got a team of people, a family unit, a team, a workplace unit going through crisis together. You can't, the head doesn't say, well, foot, you don't matter because you're not the head. Hand doesn't say, hand, you're not the head, I'm not the head, so I don't matter. You need the whole body. We need all the parts, all the pieces to work together to do what we're supposed to do. It just makes sense. We leverage each other's strengths. It's way more invaluable than insisting we all do it the same way. So let me get to the fourth part. 4 things that I've learned about dealing with crisis, especially as going through this with other people. The fourth thing is, if we open our eyes and learn as we're going through crisis, this isn't a surprise. If you've listened to any of my episodes or any of the interviews I've ever done, or if you've read a single blog post that I've ever posted, you know that I am relentlessly in pursuit of even better. But here's the message. If we open our eyes, if we open our ears, if we listen and learn as we go through this crisis, we can be more equipped next time. But Sinikka, I don't want to be more equipped next time. I don't actually want to go through this now. Yeah, okay. I'll I'll hear you there. I don't want to go through this time either. And I sure as heck don't want to go through this again. But if we open our eyes, I'm a visual thinker, so of course I started with that. But if we open our eyes, if we open our ears, if we open our minds, if we learn as we go, if we allow ourselves to learn through this crisis, we can be more equipped next time. Now, what do I mean by next time? Maybe I don't actually mean the next time we face a similar crisis or a crisis of this magnitude, heaven help us. Maybe I mean 30 seconds from now when we have to take another breath. Maybe I mean the next similar experience we have that gets our heart pumping because it is a tough moment. Maybe I mean our next encounter with big decisions or turning points or financial or personal or communal tipping points. If we pay attention, if we open our eyes and learn, we can be more equipped next time. So what are we learning? Well, we're learning about ourselves. How do I respond in crisis? We're learning about how we self-manage. How can I do that better? We're learning about the people around us. How do they respond? We're learning how we can help them. How can I support them better? How can I give them what they need? How can I be a support for them? And we're learning from them. What did they do that's simple enough that I could do that too? Did they do something that I'm like, hey, if I'm ever in a crisis and they're not there, did I just learn a skill that I could apply? How cool would that be to learn a read the room skill from someone who's really good at it? How cool would that be to learn a calm other people down skill from someone who's a master at calming others down? How cool would that be to learn a decision-making skill from someone who's really great at decision-making, or a patience skill from someone who seems to have an abundance of patience when I myself do not? I could listen to the words of someone who inspires with encouragement, or who gives voice to their thoughts or their fears or concerns, and I could model my language after theirs. I could learn. If I pay attention, I could learn how they do it. So next time, maybe I could try it. Maybe that's one more tool I've got in my own toolbox to help me be more well-rounded. It doesn't mean I need to be the best. And I still honor and acknowledge, because this was my point number 2, that we all do crisis differently and it's valuable and useful. But if they've got a tool that I don't have, growing my own toolbox so that I can face crisis better, especially if they're not here with me, that seems like a good skill. So there it is, my friends. 4 things I've learned about dealing with crisis. I hope you find this useful, and I hope you find it useful not because you're going through crisis. If you are going through crisis right now, my heart goes out to you, and I'd be happy to pray for you. Reach out to me, and I'd be happy to add you to my prayer list. In the meantime, if there's something that you're picking up from this, some tool that you're using, some way that this is helping you, I would love it if you would reach out. Our mission here at Your Clear Next Step is to help us all have better work days. And my personal mission is to be useful. So if we're being useful in any way, we'd love to hear about it. Thanks so much for listening. And on behalf of all of us here at Your Clear Next Step, we hope the rest of your day is even better.
Thank you for tuning in today. The Even Better podcast will be back with more content soon. But in the meantime, subscribe to our podcast or check out our website at yourclearnextstep.com for more information. See you next episode.